school. So I went on and I made my grade that year, and I was the youngest one to ever finish at Buford High School, and I think that still holds true today. I finished high school at Buford when I was 14 and a half years old. So that's one thing I remember about. But back in my first day of school, we had seesaws on the playground at school. Then just a big old long board over a piece of a log or something. And me and another little boy were on one end of the seesaw, and one of the Carnes boys, I don't remember where it was, Carl or one of the, all those Carnes boys that lived close there, was on the other end. He was in high school when I was, or not high school, 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. We had 6 grades in that 1-2 room school. 1st, 2nd, 3rd in one room, 4th, 5th, and 6th in the other room. Well, he was on one end, and we had 2 of us balancing on the other end. Well, when he jumped on this thing, and it threw me up in the air and cut a flip, and I fell and broke my arm. And because I had to walk home, because we lived, quarter mile or half a mile back down the road behind the school down there. And Daddy took me to the doctor. I'll never forget the old doctor. He, of course, as a little kid, I'm sure I was crying, but I remember the only thing he said, hush up your crying, boys, and it'll get well before you get married. And I remember that. As long as I live, I'll remember what he said. But it did get well. But a couple things I remember. We had a big old watermelon patch up on top of the hill up there behind the school, and Shelby probably remembers this. Right behind them, we had Hopewell Church and the school, and the road went down by our plantation down to the farm. And we had a watermelon patch up on top of that hill up there. And somebody kept stealing our watermelons, so Daddy got up there one night and sat on the stump in the middle of the watermelon patch with his shotgun. And he dozed off to sleep. And all of a sudden he heard something that raised up in the watermelon patch, and he heard something, he just shot out his gun up in the air. And these boys from up at Hopewell Church, they had what they call a league on Wednesday night, like our training union in Baptist Church. And those boys would come out there and steal watermelons, and they crawled in that muddy field all the way back to the church. Up there. Come to the store the next day, he was up at the store, they told on themselves, told one another about it. They got home and all their Sunday clothes, everybody wore white ducks back then, said they were red from their face all the way down, when they crawled all the way back up to the field. I thought it was one of the funny things. And we had an old soldiers reunion every 4th of July there on the school ground. That was for World War I and the regular Revolutionary War, or wars before that too, didn't it, Shelby? I don't remember now. So anyway, we had all the old soldiers met on the 4th of July and had a big, and they always had speakings there. All of the people that were running for candidates, would come and they'd speak to everybody. But I was just a little tiny fellow. And they sold ice cream and drinks and everything like that. And I went up to this place where selling ice cream, and this fellow said, "Son, do you like some ice cream?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'd like some ice cream." So he gave me an ice cream, and I just got it and walked on off. I didn't know any difference. I didn't know I was supposed to pay for it. So when my dad came up there, he says, "JD, come up here and got some ice cream. He didn't pay for it." And he said, "Well, what did you ask him?" He said, "Well," I said, "Do you want some ice cream, son?" And I told him, "Yeah." He said, "Well, so what? You asked if he wanted it." He said, "Yes, you gave it to him." So funny little things like that you remember in the past. Talking about the potatoes going to Winthrop. I went with Daddy when we took a truckload of sweet potatoes. We dug those things up there when Oline and Tilly were at not Winthrop, but Lincoln. And hauled a truckload of potatoes up there one time on it. But on every Saturday, Dad had a regular route in town that he called a customer's route. We went up down every street back on the mill village, and he carried all kinds of produce, and nearly every week we butchered a cow or butchered a pig, and he sold meat right off the back of the truck. He cut it right on, had a great old big box in the back of his truck, and white sheets on it, and he kept his meat covered up, and he cut off just whatever these people want and sell it right off of the truck. Of course, health departments wouldn't let you do nothing like that now, but back then you could. But I used to have to go with Dad every Saturday. I sat on that truck all day long. He'd go to all these houses, collect the money, and take the order, and come back there into the truck. And I stayed on the truck with him every Saturday. But one Saturday we had a lot of watermelons, and he put me on a truck on a wagon about daylight, with a wagon load of watermelons. And I took them up on what called White Street. That's where all the blacks congregated in Lancaster. And I sat up there all day one Saturday selling watermelons. And guess what they sold for back then?
5 cents.
Yeah, the little ones, the smaller ones sold for a nickel. The biggest ones we ever had, biggest ones we had sold for a quarter. They were big old water melons like that, you know, for a quarter. Ones you pay $3 or $4 for now. But most of them sold for a nickel and a dime. But I sat there all day and sold watermelons till about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I remember now. And then I took off, which was about, I guess, what, 7 or 8 miles back home to the wagon. Drove those horses back home. And some other things I wrote down here now, what all I did. Oh yeah, and every Saturday after I graduated from, well, it was before I graduated from high school. When I was in high school, I ground corn every Saturday, all day long. We had a corn mill, and people would bring the corn in there to us, and we'd grind cornmeal. We had a great old big gasoline engine. The wheels were about this tall, a big old one-cylinder engine. We had to crank that thing by getting on the side of it, catch hold of those big old wheels and turn it to get it set. And it sat there and said, just go pop, 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 pop all day long. It had one cylinder and had an exhaust on it. And I grind corn every afternoon until I went off to school. Daddy finally sold the corn mill. I don't know, remember now who he sold. I think somebody in Jonesville or something come all the way where he bought that thing. That big old engine. That thing must have weighed tons. I don't know how they ever loaded that thing. But on the way home from the corn mill one night, my good friend Bruce Taylor could drive, and I couldn't drive the car then. I hadn't learned how to drive. And he was driving our old Studebaker home. And the foot feed got hung up on that thing. And we were trying to turn into the road going down to the house, and he missed the road and hit just centered a tree. And that thing had on the end of the crankshaft, it had a thing to go out that you crank hook on a spring. You pushed it in to engage it to crank it, you know, but then when you took the crank out, it come back out from the flywheel. And that old center post just went right straight into that thing, into the tree. It bent the bumper in like this, but it didn't even hurt that old car engine. Just wondered now if there'd been a car like that, it'd been a total loss. But it hit just centered. You could go in there and there was a big old hole about that big right in that tree where that thing just centered into the tree. We got it back out and drove it on home and wouldn't tell Daddy what happened to it. But he found out sometime that we centered that tree up there with that thing. But that was some odd things. I think that's about all that I had down on here that I remember in the old days. I do remember that Shaylor and I used to fight like cats and dogs. We used to, if a corn cob would kill you, we'd go be dead. Because we used to get out there in the yard and we'd get fussing, throwing corn cobs at one another. And Daddy'd have to come out, our mother would have to come out and get on us nearly every day. We'd get back. I guess we were too close to the same size or same age or something or other, but we were just fought like cats and dogs. I remember that. That's about it.
Flossie asked the question if those were used corn cobs that were destroyed.
These are all that front barn.
I just mentioned 2 or 3 things. J.D. talked about going to school early and got along fine. I went to school when I was 5 years old, and I didn't like it. I ran off the first day and finally
Had to go back to
went on the way back home and hid under the bed out there in that room that came off that porch. Some of you remember?
That was the 3rd bedroom.
Yeah.
That was bedroom 3.
Yeah, bedroom 3. I slept in that bedroom with the hired help. I don't know why I was placed out there with them. And about every other year I'd take the 7-year itch because easy to help us work, you know, would come with that. And I don't know how many times I had the regular old time itch. But anyway, on that first day of school I hid under the bed and Daddy got home, he found me out there and he dressed me down real good and took me back to school, and I never did leave school again. That was pretty good lesson, I guess. One other thing, Shelby talked about his seeing the car first time. When I was young and J.D. was young and some of the others, we were in the field chopping cotton. You don't know what chopping cotton means. That's where you're going to chop the grass out of it and then the cotton out. And we got thirsty, and we sent J.D. home to get a bucket of water. he got that water, got back almost to the field, and some terrible roaring came over the woods. An airplane, none of us seen an airplane before. J.D. got excited and threw that bucket down and ran down into the woods. It was like he starved for you. He had to go back home and get another bucket of water back here. But that was his inauguration of airplanes. I remember getting kicked real hard. I was plowing in the field right above the old pond. It's down behind the barn, some of you recall. And the mules, evidently, we plowed up a yellow jacket's nest, and they got stinging the mule, and they got all out of the traces, and I got out there trying to get them back in the traces, and one of those mules kicked and hit me right between my pelvis and my ribs, which was lucky. And it knocked me, I guess, from the bar over there, and knocked me out, really. Knocked all the air out of me for a long time. I finally came back to, but I took the mule back home then and put them up. But that's the reason I have stomach trouble, I guess. They knocked all the stuff out. One other thing, Ray owes me a little debt of gratitude, or maybe not. I saved his life one time. We were coming home from working out in the field and all driving the wagon. I don't know why we were taking the wagon back home, but there was peaches over, would be on his right there next to the new house where they lived then. And Ray decided to jump off the wagon and get some peaches. And he was over on the left side of the wagon, coming up toward the house from down the field, and he jumped off that wagon, and just as he jumped, I glanced and saw a car was coming around us. I grabbed a hold of him and held him long enough that you almost broke your wrist, didn't you, when you hit the side of the car with it?
Hit the back of the car with it.
Yeah, with his hand. He came that close. If I hadn't got him, I'm sure he could have got crippled for life and got killed. Because the car didn't blow it or anything, just going around that wagon on the left side of the road there. And then we were talking at lunch today, and Clement has a bar up here, and it used to be right prominent place up there. You could stick your finger in it when he was growing up. Because we were getting ready to go down to Mr. Jim, Hinson, I believe it was, down near Union one time, and they gave me the task to take care of Clement, and I was carrying him out in front of the yard, the old house down there. And he was heavy, you know, he was just two down the line, Cecil here, and then Clement, and he was probably a year old at that time, and I dropped him. And his head hit the root of that tree, and I could hold it, and I could put your thumb in it. I remember. Well, back then, you know, we didn't go to the doctor too often. They just took some tape and taped it up, and so he, for years, had a big hole up there in his head. But he finally got over it.
That wasn't totally true. You didn't drop him. He kicked himself out of your arm.
Might have. But anyway, I was responsible for it, and I got spanking, and he got tenderly cared for.
Written and shared in time. But J.D., I don't remember what you remember when, since you were so far ahead in education, you had to wait a while before you went on to college, so the others could catch up with you and so forth. But in the meantime, Shelby had opened up a service station in town, and J.D. went to work with him for a while, and he bought him a little Austin car. I don't know how many of you remember his Austin car, but every time I see that Volkswagen advertisement with all those 20 people getting in that car, and I remember him taking us to school one day in that car, and some of the neighbors and us, and those children kept getting out of that car, and somebody asked, how many kids can that car hold? And a little Austin, it was smaller than the VW Bug, I guess. But that's one thing I remember about his first car experience along the way. I remember that first airplane too, that Shaylor was telling.
He didn't tell me they were afraid I was going to run into the creek. I'd headed straight to the creek, and he chased me down and got me.
But that was a memorable experience.
First time I ever saw an airplane.
Birds flying with the extra noise. It's a little different from the crows we heard, and whippoorwills and other things that were flying through the air along the way. But talking about bartering, and I'm sure some of the others of you remember this, in the early days money was very scarce, and we'd get a special treat if our chickens were doing well at a particular time and there were extra eggs in the nest. We would twist Mama's arm and talk her into giving us an egg that we could take to the store and trade for a lollipop or something else. So I remember that experience a number of times. It was enjoyable as we were growing up. And Clement not only had those naughty times of kicking out of arms and fighting with me when we didn't disagree. We were sort of like Shaylor and J.D. at times, but most of the time we got along well. I remember one time he had had pneumonia for the third time, and the mom and dad were being very careful. And this time, in hopes that he could build up a resistance so he wouldn't hopefully have it again, I'm sure. It must have been thinking. And I kept begging Mom to let Clem go out and play with me. And finally she made him go out on that porch beside that third bedroom. And he could go out on the porch on the south side of the house in the warm sunshine. And if he'd stay on the porch there, we could play some on that porch. And that was as I recall, the third case of pneumonia that he had in those years of growing up and developing his resistance to whatever. And I remember another time talking about the watermelon patch that we too got to be mischievous a little bit along the way. Mr. Ben Usher had ran that store across the way up on the highway, and we'd have shortcuts through there to his store, through his property, and a neighbor's property. But there was a big apple tree out there in the middle of this field. So one fall we were out sampling his apples, and he happened to see us across there and yelled down across that field, I guess a quarter of a mile away, "Get out of that apple tree and go home, boys." So we remembered that as a special challenge to stay out of his apple tree.